management in Kenya. He has over 15 years of experience that entails citizen engagement, service delivery, national and local government governance. He's also done research on policy, is also done policy analysis and advocacy, capacity building, training, and done talks on matters education. He's been involved in research and he spent some time coaching and training young people. He served in different boards, among them the Youth Agenda, the International Institute for Legislative Affairs. And I want to say that he's a speaker, contemporary speaker who is engaged on different public talk shows on devolution, politics, and governance. His PhD is from Germany, earned in 2017, and where he also did his master's through the scholarship program that is facilitated by DAAD. That's DAD. So I'm happy to say that the speaker is also known to myself. He was my boss when I was serving as the executive director, or sorry, as the CEO of the International Institute for Legislative Affairs. So I wish him well, and my appetite is whet. So I think with that, I would say, welcome Abraham Rugo. You are speaking to Kenyans, people who really want to understand this topic. Abraham, when I shared the flyer on different platforms, there's a gentleman who said, we do not want to be lied to today. We want to hear the truth. So over to you. I think I don't want you to take an oath of office to say that I will speak nothing and nothing but the truth, but I just want to wish you well, and I look forward to this discussion. And karibu sana, Abraham. So just for the record, colleagues, we will have 30 to 40 minutes sharing by Abraham Rugo. And then from there, we will have a plenary section where we will look at the notes that you will have shared online, together with also giving some of us time to share. So over to you, Dr. Rugo. You're muted. You're muted, Abraham.
Good. So thank you so much, Kimosop, for that very kind introduction. And I want to hope that everybody can hear me pretty well. I'm trying to get my slides to flow, but I see they are jumping as soon as I move to screen share. So what I'm going to do, as I start, basically, I'm going to say a couple of things, and hopefully I will have sorted this out in a minute. The topic that is ahead of us is critical, and is important for us to be able then to reflect on what this means for our country. I have, as Kimosop has said, I've had the chance to work on different topics in this country. And one of the things I want to start by right away stating is that we all have a responsibility. We all have an obligation and a duty to serve our country wherever the Lord leads us. I would like to also state categorically that I'm a born-again Christian, and it's my Christian faith and being a follower of Jesus that has convinced me of the need for us to be stewards. Stewards of the resources that God has put in our hands, stewards of the things that God desires that we achieve for our country. But rightly to say that we have not always been faithful. A lot of us have spent a lot of time complaining, pointing fingers, murmuring and grumbling against our leader, and rightly so, and very justified. But I think the question I want to ask, to try and attempt answer this evening, is: have we done our part? Have we done our reasonable duty, civic duty as citizens, civic duty as human beings living in this space called Kenya that God has put us in. And perhaps then we can advance it to even asking, have we done our Christian duty of working to ensure that justice flows like a river, and that there is mercy in the land, and that the righteousness of God rules in our country. So having said that, I want to attempt a second attempt to get us going. Kimosop, tell me if now you can see it a bit more.
Very well, you're good.
Thank you. So the discussion this today is on matter of public debt. Now, why debt, and where do we stand as a country? Now, the country I'm referring to is the Republic of Kenya, that constitutes of a national government led by one President Uhuru Kenyatta, and the 47 county governments led by the different governors. But for purposes of today, our conversation is going to focus on the national government and not so much as the county government, because it's a national government that is given by the Constitution the responsibility and the basically the duty to be able to procure debt on behalf of the public of Kenya. So we anticipate that our responsibilities for governance are going to be handled in a way that is of that is of integrity, in a way that is prudent for that. So public debt is a means of plugging budget deficits. So as would happen even in your own environment or in your own household or at a personal level, that when you have an income of so much, but you have an expenditure of so much. If, for instance, you plan to build a house of 2 million shillings, but all the money that you have is 1 million shillings, then it means you have to raise the extra 1 million shillings through either a loan from your chama, from your SACCO, or from the bank, or from which other spaces. So public debt is a means, is a revenue. In other words, it's procured and therefore becomes revenue, but it's a way of plugging in budget deficits. We'll come back to what that has meant in them. But it's to enable us to be able to invest today for returns tomorrow. The bigger question, of course, is, are the returns assured? So in other words, are we investing in spaces where we are going to get any return when we need it, or is it like the man who was given one talent and decided to bury it under a stone and had nothing to show for it? The Constitution, in Article 201, the Public Finance Management, Chapter 12, Article 201, states clearly that all public debt shall be procured in a way that the benefits and the burdens are shared between the current and future generations. And there's a question there to be asked, is the public debt that we have incurred bringing returns and benefits to our current generation, and those and assuring that there will be a return on invest. I mean, there will be a benefit to future generations, or is it just passing burdens from this current generation to the future generation? I beg to state that I think the burden is becoming bigger than the benefit. As of November 30th, and this is by the statement made by the Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Ukur Yatani, to Parliament, our total debt stock stood at 7.12 against a limit of Kenya shillings 9 trillion. Now, our limit is that Parliament did approve to change how much we can take, and I will try and break this down to the simplest of possibility. So take it that you have your total worth. If you were to sell everything you own, you would have 100 shillings. We would call that GDP, gross domestic product. Basically, our entire economy, if it was to be liquidated, if it was to be exchanged for cash, it would amount to something around 10 trillion Kenya shillings. Now, Parliament, initially, the limit was a percentage, 50% of the 10 trillion of the GDP. So in other words, if the GDP is at 10 trillion, you should not take debt that is more than 5 trillion, so to say. But then Parliament changed that limit from a percentage to an absolute figure of 9 trillion the year before, that is in 2019. And already within a year, we had pushed to 7.12. As by last month, the estimates are at 8.41 trillion. So in other words, there's just about 600 billion that is left. If you include the deficit that the budget policy statement, the official document that was released by Treasury for discussion 1 week ago, and will be published next week, I think on Friday or thereabout, then we are talking about an extra deficit of another about 1 trillion. In other words, this figure will be surpassed. What does that mean? Where is the problem? I submit that I think the problem is not a problem of limits. It's a problem of prudence. It's a problem of values. It's a problem of the stewardship within which the public resources are spent. So, but importantly to say that debt, as we stand now, Kenya's public debt is now mostly from external sources. So the graph I have there shows you up to June of 2020. We are still trying to get, I mean, the numbers, but they are not going to be very different. They're just going to, I think it's moved now to 49% and 51%. The yellow line is external debt. This is debt that is procured from external sources. So from the Eurobonds, World Bank, other governments, and all these other, external sources. The blue line is domestic debt. Now you notice that we started in 2012, and we could do the numbers back into the other years, but basically we were at about 55% just about 6-7 years ago, and our domestic debt has been declining percentage-wise, but not in absolute figures. In absolute figures, of course, the numbers are going up, and I will show that. So there is a story here, because what happens is that external debt comes in foreign currency. So it comes that currently our highest currency is in US dollar. When the dollar fluctuates, so for instance, take an example that we borrowed, 1,000 shillings, $1,000 when the dollar was at 100 shillings. Now the dollar is at 109 shillings. And therefore it means that our net present value of that debt is not $1,000, but basically it's $1,000, but it's no longer 100,000 Kenya shillings, but rather it's 109,000. Now multiply that with the millions and billions that we have borrowed, and you see what that means. So every time there is a fluctuation and an increase, especially in the exchange rate, particularly what has happened when we have less exports going out, then so that's how the picture looks like as we stand. But this table, and I put it there deliberately, not to show you just many numbers, but I wanted to show something that there's a trend. Now, the first line there is on domestic debt. This is the money that we borrow locally. And what you notice is that between 2012 and 2018, the very last column, if you can see, the very last column, you see the change. So there's not been any change about monies that we borrow from the central bank. So because the central bank, as much as is a banker for government, it is also a bank that lends money to government, sometimes to plug in short-term deficits, for instance, end month salary payments and the like. But the commercial banks, we have had a decline, which is shown by the other figure that showed that domestic debt borrowing has actually been going down. But I want you to look at the external debt and look at the multilateral. So multilateral are basically the equivalents of the World Bank and other institutions that basically would put money in a pocket, in a pot, and then lend it to Kenya. Bilateral is mostly government to government, a single actor to the government of Kenya. But the commercial banks, the external commercial banks, the money they have lent to Kenya has grown by 14%. Now, you know very well that commercial banks provide these loans at a higher rate, at a shorter term, at a higher rate, and therefore that means that then the repayment is quite high. And there you will put things like the Exim Bank of China and other institutions, the Paris Club and the like. What that means is that because of this fluctuation, then our debt has become more expensive over time. And in the Kenyan case, I would compare these to, for instance, the loan you would take from your SACCO and the loan you would take from a bank. There's a big difference because of the commercial nature of the two. But what explains why things are the way they are? The graph on your left is taken from the latest document we have from the National Treasury, and it shows the fiscal deficit. So what is a fiscal deficit? A fiscal deficit is saying that this year, and for purposes of those who might not be aware, our financial year runs from the month of August to the month of June the following year. So currently we are in the financial year 2020-2021, which will end on June 30th of this year. Now, for each of those financial year, a budget has to be approved by June. Now, when the budget has to be approved, there are two critical figures in any budget, or critical items in every budget. First is, where are we going to get the money from? That is revenues. And in government terms, our greatest source, our main source of revenue is what we call ordinary revenue. Ordinary revenue basically is the tax that we pay and any other charges that are incurred for purposes of that. So when we talk about taxes, is income tax, which includes corporate tax and pay as you earn. Import duty, all the taxes that you pay when you buy something from outside the country. Excise duty, which basically is a tax that is charged for transactions and any that happen, including on airtime and bank transactions and the like. And then finally, we have VAT, value added tax, which is charged on consumption goods. Then other aspect of ordinary revenue is what we call non-tax revenue. So when you go to the Ministry of Lands, you pay some fees for purposes. When you're buying land, you pay stamp duty. When you go to NTSA, you pay certain fees there for you to be processed. When you go to immigration office and you need a new passport, then you pay certain. So that's what constitutes our ordinary revenue. Now, a deficit occurs when your ordinary revenue and so the second item is expenditure. So the first one is, where shall we get the money from? The second one is, where shall we spend the money? So our total expenditure. So the difference between our total estimated expenditure and our total estimated revenue is the deficit. Now, the goal of, as you see that graph, the green side, with the black line, is that the idea is to reduce the deficit. But the truth of the matter is that in the last couple of years, the deficit has been increasing. And the table on the side shows you what has been happening. So the first column is the year. This is in the year. The year is not in billions. It's just basically in calendar year. But the numbers are in billions in column 2 and column 3. My apology for that. The deficit in the approved budget. So this is the deficit with which the budget that goes to parliament is approved with. So in 2014-2015, there was a difference of 417 billion. So that is the money that has to be borrowed. But notice what? By the time the financial year was coming to an end, the deficit had been revised upwards. In other words, we could not raise the 417, but we actually raised our deficit to 732, and therefore the deficit went up by 76%. So this is basically saying that you earn 100 shillings, your expenditure is 150 shillings, but somewhere along the middle of the month, you decide that as much as I am not going to be able to raise, to raise the 150 shillings, I'm going to raise my expenditure to 180 shillings. So what that means is that you have increased how much you must borrow. And that has been the trend. Every year, the deficit has been revised upwards. And that explains the situation that we are in, when deficits are, first of all, in the first place, are approved. And deficits are not wrong in and of themselves. A deficit is not wrong in and of itself, because we know very well that we have unlimited needs, but we have finite resources. We have only limited resources. And therefore, what we must do is that we must find a way to bridge this gap, to be able to invest in areas that will bring a return on investment. And therefore, over time, hopefully, then we are able to pay that money back. So but then you ask, okay, fine. So the deficit has been rising. Well, maybe that is not a problem. We have not been able to meet all our, but perhaps the amount of money we are spending in paying for the debt that we have incurred is also matching well with our income. So this graph shows you how the money we pay in debt. Now, let me go back a step back and say that debt, just like your own loan, when you take a loan, is a fast charge. Now, if you take a loan from a SACCO, you allow the SACCO to have something. You allow allow the SACCO to reach out to your employer to do something called check-off system. What that means is that before the money hits your account, the loan money has already been taken away. The same case if you do to the bank. As soon as your salary checks in, the first thing they do is that they withdraw, they take their share of the debt repayment. So just like that, even in the public space, in the public sector, debt is a fast charge to the income of the country. In other words, it means that it's first you pay debt before you can pay health workers. It's first you pay debt before you can provide resources for education and other. So as you notice, our share of ordinary revenue that is being used to debt repayment has been rising from about 16% to 42% in 2018-2019, and by last financial year 19-20, we were at about 55%. Now, this shows you the debt servicing. So it's the same story, but then compared. So external debt servicing is erratic, and that could be indicative of a poor restructuring of debt and when they fall due. Now, the other thing that is not only that the amount that we are paying to debt is rising, but has also been going through some almost like, it's a bit erratic. So when you look at, total external debt service, the yellow line, and then the blue line, you realize there are years when we have paid about 76% in 2012, 2013, then 74%, then 55%, then 69%, then 69%, then 52%. In other words, it seems to fluctuate and be erratic, which says that perhaps there is no clear scheduling of how much money we expect to pay year on year. And that could be explained by the fact that since we take commercial debt that needs to be paid at certain points. So when, for instance, the first payment for the SGR loan came due sometime mid of COVID period last year, then there's a lot of money that needed to be spent in that process, and basically almost left our coffers dry. So, but as debt service grows from one year to the next, allocations for critical services, especially devolution and county governments, have been dropping, as well as the shareable revenue has also not grown as much. So we have three columns there. The first column is debt service. So this is how much we have paid year on year to public debt. Now, the second column is a total ordinary revenue. It's debatable whether it's the shareable revenue, because a few mathematics normally go on before we arrive at the shareable revenue. But yes, that's the amount of money we have been raising on each financial year. Now, then counties allocation is the third figure. This is the amount of money that goes to facilitate the 47 counties our devolution. Now, you look at the percentages and you realize that on average, the amount we are spending year on year on public debt has been growing at an average of 30%. Our income has been growing at an average of 13%. Up to 2019, 2020, where we still were at about 12 or thereabout, and in 2021 we suspect it's going to be at about 5%, if not 4%, in terms of growth, if not a negative growth. But the county allocation has been growing at 10% and has been growing at a decreasing rate, as you notice, 19%, 8%, 7%, 5%, and the last 2 years it has been at 0%. And if you factored in inflation, then you are talking of about negative 3% and then negative 8% the last 2 financial years. Now, friends, this must concern us. There is no way the amount of money you are paying to debt can be growing at 2 times, this year almost at 3 times, the amount of the growth in your own revenue and in your own income. I come back again to your income. So your income is still 100 shillings. You've been revising your, your deficit year, month on month, even if your revenue is not changing, almost by 13–14%. Your revenue is actually not increasing at that much rate, but the amount of money you are spending on repaying debt is going up month on month. Now, I don't need to describe what would happen at the end, but I think suffice to say that then there is a crisis. Now, 2019, 2020 was disrupted by COVID. Now, COVID disrupted in a very special way, disrupted the most critical of our incomes because it disrupted labor. It is disrupted. Now, I talked about four types of income tax, sorry. The most critical one is income tax. Now, income tax includes corporate tax and pay as you earn that we all pay to the government. Now, that has accounted for the longest time for it was at about 47–48% a couple of years ago. It's been declining up to about 42% as a total share of the amount. In other words, if we collect 100 shillings, 42 shillings have been coming from corporate tax. Now, when companies closed and people lost their jobs and government reduced the amount of tax, then that accounts for the decline that we have seen in revenue. But that was not matched by a decrease in expenditure. In fact, in another space, I did comment, and I still hold that it seems that everything else is declining apart from public expenditure, which is something that must concern us. And because then public expenditure is growing, this year alone, we are looking at a deficit of 1 trillion against a total expenditure of about 3 trillion. We can only raise 2 trillion, but at a reality of what I have just said, that because incomes have gone down, and what happens with the incomes? When incomes go down, VAT, import duty, and excise duty are factors of incomes. So when you don't have an income, you cannot import a car. You may indulge in some activities, basically of addiction, to be able to try and manage your stresses, and that may explain some limited growth in VAT. But essentially, it's not a growth in the economy. Allow me to proceed. But if this is the picture, one would argue, but where does the money go? Oh, rightly, yes. We have incurred a lot of public debt. This money should be going somewhere. Now, I want first of all for you to imagine that you still earn your 100 shillings per month, and your employer on a good day tells you, I'm going to add you 80 shillings to your monthly income. Now, when you add somebody 80 shillings, in other words, if you increase their salary by 80%, it will be visible, whether in indulgence or in investment. Now, if we are saying that we have borrowed and guaranteed loans of about 8.41 trillion Kenya shillings against a GDP of 10 trillion, therefore you're saying that we have injected into the economy over the last couple of years 84% of the total wealth of that economy, then it should be visible. And if it is not visible in investment, then it is visible elsewhere. I will not go into that line of conversation. I'm sure we'll come to it in the discussion. But where does the money go? So we did some analysis because other international budget partnership, we are interested in the question of equity, and I'll speak a bit before I come to the end of my presentation. So we found that the proportion of the money overall goes to infrastructure heavy projects. That's to energy, to infrastructure. ICT takes on average 44%. Environment, water and natural resources, and largely these are water projects, takes 39%. And of course, you know, the examples of Aurora and Kimorer dams all fall in here. Agriculture, rural development, rural and urban development, whether you think about the irrigation schemes that are supposed to have provided food security, and what has happened. Health takes about 11%. General economic and commercial affairs takes another 11%, and the like. So our money is going. So in other words, if 44% of this money is going to energy, infrastructure, and ICT, we should be seeing fairly heavy investments. Are you able to point some of those investments? And I'm not saying they are not there, but I think it's a critical conversation. But there's a second question which we have not yet answered, of how equitably distributed are these projects? Are they concentrated in certain areas of the country, or are they sufficiently distributed? Are roads being done across the country? Are railway lines being opened across the country? Are energy projects being undertaken? ICT projects, environmental and water projects? Is there equity where we can say, okay, fine, yeah, yes, we are carrying a burden, but we are also having a shared enjoyment of the benefits of that burden? But there was an argument that perhaps during the COVID time is when we have borrowed much more than we borrowed during the other times of the year. So we did a comparison of the 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2019, 2020 towards the financial. And we realized that the growth in debt, which matches the increase I talked about in raising of the fiscal deficit during the year, actually has not changed. So COVID is not an explanatory factor per se to the rise in, this has been a trend that has been going on and on. And perhaps deserves much more conversation. But more importantly is that transparency of how these whole processes happen still seems to be wanting. Credit where it is due. We have much more information on public debt today than we did a couple of years ago. You now can log onto the central bank website, and you can be able to see how much money was received from treasury bills, from domestic borrowing, and from international borrowing month on month. As we talk, you could check that. So yes, we have, but we don't know the terms and the conditions of these of some of these debts. We don't know what we have committed as a country. You know, what is the, what will be the penalties of non-compliance? Because I dare to submit that it has reached a point where we are borrowing to refinance other debts. So basically borrowing Peter to pay Tom, as it were. What then does this mean, friends? Our spending is not in tandem with our revenue. Growing deficits means that we shall reach a point we cannot sustain our expenses anymore. Now, we know countries that have reached that point, that they would not be able to pay their expenses, whether you think about paying for public services, paying salaries, and even just generally running the economy. But since public debt and pensions, now I did not discuss about pensions because time could not allow me, but suffice for me to explain to you colleagues that we are in a bigger crisis. And the crisis is that in the year 1985, some of us were still very young, between 1985 and 1990, the government of Kenya, as part of the international conditions for being able to access credit services and other support, agreed to something called the Structural Adjustment Program. And many of you will remember about the famous Golden Handshake, where people working in the public service were retrenched. That was the Golden Handshake was just a soft side of it. They were retrenched, and in tandem, employments were frozen. So what happened is that the last crew to be employed en masse within public service, excluding teachers and doctors and nurses, were employed between 1985 and 1990. Now, assuming those people were the age of 25 years of age, just about having finished their formal education, therefore, majority of those people, including when the retirement age was increased from 55 to 60, are retiring in the period 2020. Sorry, they're retiring in the period, they were to retire in the period 2015 to 2020, but because their years were increased by 5, majority of them are retiring between 2020 and 2025. What tells us? And because of that, and in fact, the period from 2015 also is there. So in the last 2 years, the amount of money we are paying to pensions has doubled from about 54 billion to 110 billion. And I think this year we are going to be spending about 150 billion. Now, pensions is a liability just like public debt. It's a first charge to the Consolidated Fund services. Now, what that means is that we are going to have a huge population of people living the formal public service, and they do not have pension. Currently, anybody who has a pensioner in their home, whether it's their father, their mother, or uncle, knows that it's taking almost about on average, about 2 years to process their pensions. On one side, somebody can argue it's all an administrative process, but I dare say, on the other hand, I think there's no money. And therefore, and lastly, we are edging closer and closer to an economic shutdown and recession. Some of us believe we are already in a recession, and a recession generally described is a time when you cannot meet your obligations, your day-to-day obligations as a government, and you have to rely on treasury bills to issue treasury bills, and when they are bought, then you pay salaries or you transfer money to counties. It's when you are surviving bank account to be able to run your expense. So we are edging closer and closer, especially if we do not do something about how to raise expenditures in it. So what next? I believe that a full austerity where we only have a focus on essential spending for a period of time. But secondly, that where we spend money based on what we planned our budget, and not just shift monies and then increase the deficit, as is the case. Fiscal consolidation has been in the paper, so basically the process of trying to cut expenditures and match them with the revenues, but it must be an active process and not just in the papers. You read the budget policy statement, the draft. It talks about the journey to fiscal consolidation. In fact, the graph I showed you earlier, the title there is actually fiscal consolidation. But it must be an active thing, because as I have explained, it is now that we need to bite the bullet before later on, then it will. I think Parliament must have a cap on how much can be spent on debt servicing per year as a counter check to borrowing limits and conditions agreed. In other words, instead of saying this is the much you can borrow, we know very well the issue is not how much you can borrow. The bigger issue is that, do you have the money to actually service that public debt? And it's a recommendation we have made. We think it is time to actually set a limit. How much money can we as a country, when you take a loan from a SACCO, there is a limit beyond which you cannot pay per month, because you must be left with the money to run your life. I think it is 30%. You cannot pay more than 70% to loan and taxes and everything else. You must be left at least with 30%. Why can't we do that within this particular context, so that we limit how much we can spend year on year on debt servicing? And that technically would limit how much then, because as I say, the appetite for borrowing seems to be at an all-time high. And it's more a question of prudence and stewardship than a question of technical arguments as they are being made. Debt restructuring towards more concessional terms, I think that has been language. This is saying taking loans that are longer term, low rate, and therefore the repayment is much more easier. And finally, as I close, I think we cannot address this situation unless there is fiscal discipline. especially during budget revisions. As you have seen, budget revisions, supplementary budgets that are not even subjected to public participation are a big challenge. So I think that, colleagues, this is a call for us to be able to say, can we engage? Can we ask the right questions? Can we engage our members of parliament, because they are the ones who approve these deficits year on year? Can we do something? Because when it starts biting, it will not bite in the neighbor's house only. It will bite all of us, however much we may feel that we are exempted from the effects of this. And with that, thank you very much, and may the Lord bless you.
Wow.
Over to you, Mr.
Wow. Dr. Rugo, this is, I'm writing my notes, and I think I want to say a big thank you for painting the picture as it is. You have clearly painted out the picture in terms of the effects of borrowing, the failures by institutions like Parliament, transparency in the whole subject of public debt, and also pointed out clearly that we cannot run away from engaging. So I think with this, I would want to open the conversation. I can see the charts already coming on. I see on the chat, Zach pointing out that this is an important conversation that we should be having. That is Zach Gaia. I can see Daniel Wambete is saying that the pension payout now makes sense due to the increased retirement age. I've been wondering why. I have been following pensions, even for my, I think I'm doing at the moment for two relatives. And the reality is, administrative processes I used to delay, come tomorrow. I'm actually following for, as in two relatives, and it's very clear why then are we here. I think so that we do not, we allow this, if you could raise your hands, I'm happy to give you an opportunity to share. I see Daisy and Danias already raised a hand. So if I can get 3, then we can come. So participants, I see Daisy. I also see Nelson. Yes, so we can have Daisy, Nelson, and then let me see if there's any, and then I can come back. So I see Daisy. Daisy, let's go start. Daisy, I'm done. There you go.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Rugo, for the presentation. Happy New Year. So my question, I don't know if it's a comment or a question. However, it's very clear from what you show, as from what we've seen, is that we have a clear spending problem and a parliament that refuses to rein in the executive. Now, it has been posited by some that the reason why this problem persists, particularly with Parliament, is because of the CDF being pegged to the total budget. And so the bigger the budget, regardless of deficit, the more CDF goes to them. So it's almost like a bribery, you know? So it doesn't matter, as long as they get their pound of flesh, they're willing to let the executive continue on
Daisy, I lost your last, like the last 15 seconds.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that that it has been suggested by some that the problem of being able to rein in the executive by Parliament is because the CDF is pegged to a percentage of the budget. So my question is, given the grim reality that we are facing, the failure of Parliament to rein in the executive and clear lack of a will to do that, because even in the midst of the crisis, I mean, because it's clear that there's a crisis, the executive has now put out another budget with a 1 trillion shilling deficit. Do you think that the current leadership, Parliament and the executive, would have any willingness whatsoever to address this challenge if pleas were made? If not, do you think then, as the KCPF and a coalition of publicly spirited Kenyans, that we can put together a coalition that begins to speak very clearly about this issue and state what needs to be done, including what Jaindi Kesero put in his article recently, that we should have an external and an independent audit of our debt register. Thank you.
Thanks, Daisy. You can then put your hand down. Let's have Nelson.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Daktari. So I'm Nelson Maina from Nyeri County, a member of the Nyeri County Budget Economic Forum. And the debt issue has been of concern to us also. So maybe just to clarify to us, Daktari, is that in 2018, Parliament pushed the ceiling from 5 trillion to 9 trillion. And currently there is talk that Treasury wants Parliament to push these to 12 trillion. So maybe you can clarify that if it's true. Secondly, is it true that World Bank set a certain limit that is like the crisis point at 77% of debt to GDP, and currently we are at 71%. So is this maybe something you can clarify for us? Thank you.
You can put your hand down, Nelson, so that I can see if there's anyone else who is coming. Abraham, as we wait for the rest to raise their hands, I just wanted if you could also comment on the issue of management. As you are aware, currently before Parliament is proposed legislation on what we call the public debt management bill. Because you have in terms of institutions, you have the central bank, you have the debt management office, and then you have the legislature. So is beyond the legislature, looking at the other institution, and I'm looking at it from this dimension, Abraham. Look at the Kenya Revenue Authority, the World Bank recommendations on splitting and separating the roles between the policy and the agency. Do we need to consider strengthening, for example, the debt management framework? I would want to hear your comments on, is it an issue of strengthening these institutions, giving them autonomy? Look at what KRA does. They're able to publish, they're able to engage, they're discussing how collection of revenue. That is not the case, for example, on the debt management office. So comment on the issue of institutions. I would also want if you could to hear from you about the whole issue about what message does the restructuring. As you're aware, on the if I was to just bring to your attention on the press release released by the Treasury Monday, 11th January 2021. On the issue of the suspension, we call the application of debt service suspension initiative with the Paris Club. What does this signify, particularly on the stability and then our ability to finance our debts? I know I'm a moderator, I should not be asking much, but I'm a Kenyan also who is interested in these issues. And yeah, because when you start asking for the suspension of the payment of your debt, what does that signify? I see one hand from Nyamai. If you could allow.
Can I take those first, and then okay, I'll come.
Go ahead, Nyamai. Please bear with us.
Yeah, kindly. So thanks, Daisy. I completely associate with your sentiments. I think we do not have the will and the possibility for, in my opinion, for the institutions you have outlined to make a difference in this country. Now, and it's because of the transactional nature of our politics, where it's about scratch my back, I scratch your back, and everybody is at peace. As you know, that the Constituency Development Fund, and I'll speak to it because you did mention. initially was pegged as a percentage of income tax of income to the country. But when it was changed, I still think it is unconstitutional, but when it was changed, it was made a national government constituency development fund and was pegged as a percentage of the national government revenue. I mean, national government shareable portion of the shareable revenue. And therefore, there already is an incentive that the higher the amount that goes to the national government, the higher the amount that goes to the members of parliament. As you know very well, that our politics has turned to be, a fairly, mix of very strange bedfellows, if I was to say that. And therefore, I do not think, and I say this because I have raised this conversation in different spaces, I do not think the people who have the right intentions have the capacity, have the opportunity to make the changes, and those who have the possibilities do not have the right intentions. And therefore, I am all for an alternative citizen drive. It did happen in Jamaica, where citizens pushed quite a bit of, the thinking on how to address some of these questions. It did make quite some progress, and I think, in all honesty, I think there are alternatives that people need to come together, and we can all pull together and see what we can do, and perhaps identify people who are going to champion these processes. Because the truth of the matter is that when the real effects start being felt, and I fear that some of them will be felt a lot in the later part of this year, then it will have a great implications. Nelson, yes, I did speak to the fact, I didn't speak to the 12 trillion, but I have seen the recommendation, the request by the National Treasury to raise the amount borrowable, if I was to use that word, from 9 trillion to 12 trillion. As I have said, I do not think the problem is a problem of limits. It's a problem of prudence. It's an ethical problem. It's a problem of where the people do not pursue this from a point of stewardship, but instead, nothing stops us from developing our country by borrowing 50% of our GDP. By the time 9 trillion was being approved, I suspect that a lot had been borrowed much more, because the rate at which we have grown, the debt has grown from the time that it was raised from that was raised from the time it was raised from 50%, which is the 5 trillion that you've talked about, to 9 trillion. The numbers have grown very fast, and we are quickly approaching 9 trillion. So basically, you're trying to say that this person has a problem of, has a debt problem. His way of spending his money is really bad. So let's allow him much more space to borrow from more, from more places, and more people. And be more indebtedness. You all know we have dealt with such kind of fellows, and it's not normally. So that addiction, if I may use that word, that obsession, that there is no way there can be thought of alternatives of what to cut. But because again of our transactional politics, as I said earlier, it seems that like almost every project has got a sponsor, and therefore it cannot be touched. Because we have asked questions, why can't you reduce this? Why can't you reduce that? No, that must continue. That must continue. I think we need to be rational. We need to be realistic with what is possible. Yes, World Bank has got measures. IMF has measures. But remember, and as I said, I'll be very, very honest here. All these are banks. What they are interested in is their interest. Is that they sell money, and they make their profits and make their investors happy. They have shareholders who have put money into those structures. So you cannot expect that they will help you fix. Their only interest is that you are able to pay back, regardless of whether you are fully. So what I think is important is not so much the World Bank limits or the IMF limits, many of which we have already broken. But really, it's asking the very basic question: are we able to pay back? And secondly, are we spending this money in the rightful places? If those two questions are no, then we shouldn't be borrowing anymore. We shouldn't, we should rein in that kind of process. Kimosop, yes. I'm at a point where I don't think we need more structures and more institutions, because the problem is not a problem of structure and institutions. It boils down to a question of leadership, stewardship, and commitment to make a difference in our country. I don't think by moving the Public Debt Management Office to an authority will make any big, because there will still be there will still be a sub actor within the National Treasury, and that's where decisions are made at higher levels. There will still be a substructure to Parliament. If Parliament that is elected by the people themselves, what higher authority can you claim to be able to make a difference? So I don't think that, yes, there is an argument to be made for institutional strengthening. Yes, there is an argument to be made of certain reforms where decisions can be integrated. But as long as those who have the call of duty do not hold their responsibility, with the integrity and with the prudence that it requires, then we have a problem. And that is related to a question, to a concern that Bernard Ocheng asked, are these discussions placed on public? No. The public management debt paper is never subjected, for instance, to public participation and public consultations. And those are the things I said we are trying to push for instance, and I would invite everybody here to actually take that as a matter of interest, to ask questions about what is the debt, what is the debt register looking like? Who do we owe? How much do we owe them? What are the conditions behind those, what we owe? Yes, the budget policy statement provides an opportunity for us to engage, but rarely is a debt discussion held. But even as you engage, you want to engage in a process where your voice counts and can be counted, as it were. Yes, debt suspension, Kimosop, it's the only way to go. At this particular point, I don't think where we are, there is another route that will be devoid of negotiating, suspending our repayments, because our repayments this year alone, this financial year alone, if we pay everything we owe, we are going to spend about 70. I've just looked at the numbers. As of December 31st, we had collected 726.5 billion, and we paid 413. So in other words, we spent 57% by half year on debt. Now, you know very well that we are not likely to collect the 1.5, 1.6 trillion we had hoped to collect in this financial year because of the effects that I did explain a bit earlier. And therefore, that tells you that unless we rein in, first of all, as a quick first aid measure, we must reduce the bleeding from the revenue, and that is by the renegotiating how much we are paying month on month. I mean month on month to our creditors. Then get into the process of then working on our side of the expenditure. So that's my take. We could take the next round of questions. I am not able to answer all the questions because a lot of these I should have given a disclaimer at the beginning are my personal opinions. They are buttressed by the research we have done at the International Budget Partnership, and they are based on evidence. So none of the numbers I'm quoting are numbers from my head. They are official numbers as published. Thanks.
I'm so tempted, but I have to be disciplined. So I'll go to Violet. I'll start with Nyamai and then go to Violet, and then there is a person called Gechek. I think, I hope I have pronounced your name right. Yes. Some of us come from places where there is a problem between T and D and P and V. So please accept us as we are. So let me start with the difficult one, Gechek.
Thank you so much. My name is Geshe. I put the other initials PK together, so okay. Don't worry, it confuses you. Now I have two issues. The first one is I was hoping that Abraham will give us who do we owe the highest? Is it China? Is it the World Bank? Is it who? So, and what percentage do we owe them? Number two, the International Budgetary Forum, or the organization that you run, is it possible to have a national conversation where we call people to discuss these things? Because you have just said we are in almost a recession or we are heading there. Do you want to wait until we get there? Because this is where we will all suffer. Is it possible for there to be a forum where we invite all stakeholders to discuss these things? Because we can't wait for the government, the executive, neither the parliament to do this, because they are the culprits and they are not going to call for a meeting to discuss them. Thank you.
Thanks, Geshe. I appreciate that. Nyamai was there, so I'm trying, before I come to you, Violet, I have seen you. Nyamai, are you still there? Okay, we will wait for you. Please jump in, Violet. You're muted, Violet. Violet, you're muted.
Okay.
Violet,
Yeah, thank you for unmuting the line. So I just wanted to ask this question. Is the CS Treasury, like all these suggestions that are being made, even by the civil society organizations, even IBP is also putting these suggestions of debt restructuring. I just want to know, is the government listening? Because every time we tell them regarding the public debt, it's like they are ignoring. So I just wanted to know whether they listen to even what IBP is saying and also other bodies as well, even like TISA. I just wanted to know whether they consult them and whether they actually listen to the suggestions and act on it. Because from the presentation on the debt, we can see that debt has been rising every year. Every financial year, you can find that 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. You think it is on the rise, and yet they have experts on board who they reach out to, but I just wonder to listen to the advice that is being given. Thank you.
Very passionate Kenyan there, and we need more of that passion and starting up. Abraham, you are speaking to the right people. Go ahead. Abraham, you're muted. Abraham? You know, even IBC had a problem transmitting election results, so we understand technological challenges. So we will give you time. Meanwhile, as you prepare, please be also looking at what we have on the side chat. You can see the comments additional comments by Benjamin Ochele, who's talked about, do you think our financial governance challenges are 100% caused by unwillingness of the executive and the legislature to rein on this decision, the policy options? Daisy has also pointed out that the Jamaican example is a very good one. But then Daniel has talked about the missing, what are we missing in terms of government? When does it come to investing? What are we not getting on return on investment on energy, infrastructure, and agriculture? Abraham, were you successful? I was just filling in the gap as you address. Are we good? Abraham, are you able to unmute now? Okay. I can just as you address the technology, Geshe, I think it is possible there is data available on whom do we owe. So I can answer that question. I know Abraham is Abraham. Until you're on, I'll be standing in if it's okay with you. Okay. So Geshe, I think I can be able to share some data from on public debts, on whom do we owe. So our top 10 creditors bilateral, as at December 2018, we had China, which was number one. And the country, the contribution bilaterally was at 70.6%. And that followed by Japan at 11.7%, France at 7%, followed by, so in terms of this is in billions, in US dollars. Then number 3, France, number 4, Germany. Number 5 was Italy, 6, Belgium, US, 7, Finland, 8, and then 9, Denmark.
Now I'm back.
Good. So that's the advantage of having a moderator who has read. So please go ahead.
Thank you. And I can confirm that your numbers are correct. Yes, so China is our leading bilateral donor, and World Bank is our leading multilateral donor at 25% and 21% in terms of the categories, in terms of the amounts they lend to the country. But remember, I said these institutions, these international institutions, they are great, but they're also in business. So again, we should always keep that in mind. Let me jump straight to Geshe's question. So you've been answered on who do we owe. Can we have a forum to discuss these questions? Yes, and there are forums, the International Budget Partnership and other partners. I know Violet and a couple of other people who have had this chime in here are part of it. We do organize these forums, but as Violet has asked, and I can confirm, I don't know if they listen. Because there are many, all the issues we have raised here, we have raised them with Parliament, and severally I have left Parliament with a conviction that somebody was listening. But then when I see the final decisions, I'm left more at a loss as to what exactly may have transpired in that particular process. But that does not mean that we must not keep knocking, you know. If I may use the biblical example, there is a story given in Luke chapter 18 about this lady who needed justice. And every morning she went to knock at the door of the judge. Those must have been good days when you could actually trace the judge's house and just go and keep knocking. And we are told that she knocked until the judge said that even if I fear no God and no man, I must give this woman justice or else she shall wear me out. I think as Kenyans, we must approach that kind of idea. But I know very well that not all of us wake up every morning to deal on matters public debt and to try and answer questions about where is the money. We wake up to go and look for food for our families, school fees for our children, and go to fulfill other obligations that are critical. But I think we create spaces, yes. Every year we have about 4 national forums. One should be coming in about 2 weeks' time, when this question actually will be a critical piece of discussion. So if you are interested, please do follow us on Twitter or do reach out and we shall include you in that particular conversation. The idea being that we must keep speaking and saying, talking about these things. We must continue to give alternative views and perspectives. And at a minimum, we must keep saying the right thing needs to be done. Because that's where we elect our leaders to be able to lead us in that process.
Thanks, Abraham. I can see Nyamai is back. In addition, is Obed and Nu Ahmed. So let me start with Nyamai and then Obed and then Ahmed. Nyamai.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks to Dr. Ruga for this timely conversation. My question was, it's more of a concern. Is there a threshold of how much should be borrowed domestically and how much should be borrowed from outside? Because when you look at the statistics at CBK, you'll find that the amount that is being borrowed internally or here domestically is going up, and I'm very sure that has got an implication with our businesses and other small enterprises that we have in the country. Thank you.
Thanks, Nyamai. Obed.
Good. Thank you, guys. Good afternoon. Thank you for the wonderful session. Mine is a question. I remember one time the president was having, I think, a national address. I think it was in Mombasa. And one of the journalists asked him about our debt ratio and how it was a concern. And of course, the president, in answering, he said that countries like Japan have even much more debt ratio than, than their GDP. And if you check some of the countries, you find like Portugal, their national debt to GDP is 119%, Barbados 117%. Countries like Singapore, they're at 109%. United States, I think it is at 106% of their GDP. And so the question somebody would be asking is, for us, we can see we are still below maybe 60. I don't know whether it is below 60% or 70%. And so the question would be, which for us in context as a country, where would we be safe, in terms of national debt to GDP ratio? Thank you.
Thanks, Obed. Let's go to Ahmed.
Hi. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Ahmed. Hello.
This is Nur Ahmed from Mandara.
Yes, Ahmed.
My question is, the debt, the huge debt we have is related to corruption. And what are we doing about corruption? Because the money we borrow is still is being stolen by people who are an authority or who are in power. The second question is, most of this information you are giving us now is not available at the public domain. The common man does not know these statistics and does not even understand. How do we relate this to the common man? Thank you. Those are my two questions.
Thanks, Ahmed. This is the first time we're having a participant from Mandera. This is really encouraging and great to have you. Over to you, Ams.
Thank you, Kimo Sopan. I should have said thank you for standing in. My computer just hung on one screen and could not move to another screen, so I had to change to my phone. But nonetheless, we can continue. I will start with Nyamai's question. There's no threshold for either or. So it's really where you are able to get more money at the cheapest rate. So this boils down to pure, business sense. What makes business sense? External markets go into more, longer concessional kind of engagement. But the current government policy is to go into more borrowing domestically. That, of course, has got a huge implication because it crowds out. It means that you and I compete with government in accessing loans from government. And it's an interesting thing because government institutions also hold bank accounts with some of these financial institutions in Kenya, both commercial, but also at the CBK. So is it possible, one could argue that perhaps the government is borrowing its own money and paying it at a return of interest? It's a question that is worth exploring. But yes, there's no limit as to how much. They can choose to borrow 100% locally. That, of course, has got the huge implications. When we talked about the interest caps, the banks were not reluctant to lend to private investors because of the interest caps. Is because it made more sense with the interest caps to lend to government. Even if they were taking at a 1 or 2% lower, they are an assured creditor. They will pay back because, after all, you and I will still continue paying taxes, and therefore they have. So there's no limit, but the implications are huge, especially right now when you don't have guarantees, when you don't have a business that you can go and show, its current account and how liquid it is, and therefore viable to access public credit. The credit guarantee scheme has taken forever to pick up. which was supposed to support businesses and individuals to be able to borrow money, and therefore they can sustain businesses and the like. Obed, debt ratio. I think it's so when you think about debt ratio, is to think about you know, if I earn 100 shillings and you earn 1,000 shillings, and both of us have a loan to pay of 200 shillings, then my loan, if all I have is 100 shillings, if my total wealth, let me use that example. If all I have is 100 shillings, but I have a loan to pay of 200 shillings, and all you have, is 1,000 shillings, for instance, and what you have to pay is 200, just as an example. Our ratio, our debt to our total wealth ratio is very, very different. So are we comparing apples for apples? Are we comparing? You cannot compare Kenya. What is the GDP size of Japan? I think it's almost 5-6 times bigger than the one of Kenya. What about the US? And what kind of loans are these that they have? Some of them are very long concessional loans of 75 years, 50 years. They have long maturity terms. But what investments are they putting? I mean, let's take an example. So Japan has, the huge ratio that they have of debt to GDP ratio. But every car in front of you is a Toyota. So the investments and the business model they are pursuing as a country means that that is not money that they will be unable to pay when they need to pay. And do they need to pay it in the first place? Maybe it's money that they keep rolling into the economy, and it's continuing to engage in economic activity. So I think it's important for us to compare apples for apples and not apples and mangoes and say, oh, look at these poor apples. When will they ever grow big and be like, mangoes? I think that comparison, I think it's just a political expedience kind of a comparison, but I think you need to compare likes for likes. If you're saying countries that are the same GDP level, you take a country like Portugal, yes. Take an example like Portugal. Portugal has got a huge economic crisis. Yes, they're at 106%, but they have huge problems because of the same debt that we are talking about. Secondly, and I've just seen Daisy raise it, and I wanted to raise it also. They borrow in their own currency. They borrow in Japanese yen and in the US dollar. We borrow in a foreign currency. So in other words, we need to export something for us to gain foreign currency. And when we are a net importer, so in other words, we are importing more than we are exporting, it means basically we are spending more money. The money we are buying is more expensive than the money we are selling, as it were. So I think there is the argument of a safe debt level is based on two things that I had said earlier. One, ability to pay back, and two, investment in productive economy. And let me combine that with Ahmed. Ahmed, earlier in the conversation, and I'd expected this question to come up, I argued that when you put in 80% of somebody's total wealth, if you have 100 shillings with you, and then I come and give you 80 shillings on top of that, in other words, I put in 80 shillings into your pocket. There's a lot you can do. Now, we can see it in two ways. We can either see it in that you go just indulgent, you disappear from the village, and just go and squander the money and use it, just having fun because you have more money than, much more money, or you will put it in investment. And therefore, if we struggle to find the investment, perhaps all these private investments we are seeing are the proceeds of corruption. Now, and there is an argument to be sustained along that line because we have huge cases, we have huge scandals, of billions. It's interesting that just the other day we used to talk about, hundreds of thousands. Now we are talking of scandals that are at billion level. And if we cannot see the projects for which we are paying for these monies, or the projects are not necessarily to the level we expect of this money, then the money must have gone somewhere. And we have had politicians even argue that some of this money has made its way to private. So could it be that we are using public means to achieve private? And how do we make this conversation a common Mwananchi conversation for all of us to be able to engage? It's a difficult conversation, but I think we are trying. Forums like these ones and many others that we try to break this down should try and achieve that kind of a purpose, because corruption and abuse thrives in darkness, thrives in opaque systems, thrives with lack of transparency. And therefore, our job must be to continually push that information needs to be availed. But as a country, we also need to ask about our own software, our own mode of operation. Have we actually come to accept that extraction is the only way to make it? Have we come to accept that wealth, regardless of the means with which you access that wealth, is the only way? Could it be that part of the reason why even our young people are depressed and burning schools, that they see no value in working hard? Could it be that actually we have reached a point where we are saying hard work is for fools? Smart people work smart. They know how to cut deals. They know who to talk to. They know where to be present, in which tables to be present. There is a bigger question there, and I don't have time to pursue that argument in this particular forum. But I think there is more evidence to show that some of the money within the economy is going into the wrong places. As we are talking about debt that we cannot pay, we also struggle with a supply of real estate, both in commercial and residential terms, in millions of square feet in Nairobi alone. In other words, we have more buildings than we can ever occupy, than the economy can ever consume. We have projects all over the place. You travel this country, there are hotels popping up everywhere, huge 5-star almost level kind of investments, and many other investments that I may not know of. Could it be that that's where actually the trillions we are talking about have ended? I'm asking questions that I don't have the numbers to substantiate, but if we cannot see actual physical investments, then we should be able to say, okay, fine, if the money has entered the system, then it must have gone into something. And with that, I want to thank all of you for the conversation. I think these conversations needs to continue, needs to be sustained, needs to be developed. But please, let this not be just one of those things you listen and you go home and say, oh, things are so bad, what shall we ever do in our lives? No. You can do something. You can do something. It's a question of what is it? And at a minimum, ask a question. Send a question to Parliament. Ask your question to your member of Parliament. Publish it out there. Thank you very
much. Thanks so much, Abraham. I think that was quite commendable. I want to request the audience if we can clap digitally for those who are able to know how to clap digitally. I can see Daisy, I can see Geshe, Nelson. Fantastic. Please receive it. We are in a new normal where you have to accept this digital.
Sorry, we are losing you, Kim. You're coming, you're breaking.
Now, I was saying that please accept the digital claps now that we cannot do it in the physical. You've done a fantastic job. It is very evident that this conversation needs to be continued. At KCPF, we are ready to have another round if people want to know, because we've just started the conversation. For example, there is the whole issue about why are we having returns for the debts that we are borrowing? Even the gender dimension, I can see Daisy has been doing a fantastic work in terms of 2/3 and gender work. It affects us differently, and I am not just to summarize, debt in itself, as Abraham has said, is not a bad thing. It is what are we borrowing to do? Where is this money going to? And is there accountability, transparency in the process? So thanks so much. I can see comments from Angela saying public debt is crippling the potential of a number of countries in Africa, and giving the example of Zimbabwe. Daisy, we need to take some bold steps to reclaim our country. The first thing that we recognize that the current political leadership cannot get us out of the mess. We therefore have to organize and develop a roadmap for recovery and take our people. Pastor Muriungi has said, thank you. I want to say that we are happy to continue with these conversations. Feel free to get in touch with us. You can write to us an email, you can call our offices on things that we need to bring it and organize such engagements because such conversations are important in moving and advancing our country forward. To say a big thank you for finding time to join us this evening. We don't take it for granted. If you can allow me in 1 or 2 minutes, I have my chairperson in our midst, that is Charles Kanjama. And I would want him to make a few remarks from my side. I want to say a big thank you, Abraham. Looking forward to more of this conversation between KCPF and IBP and other partners, even as we build uninformed and a society that is accountable. I like your last parting shot, Abraham, that corruption and misuse of public resources thrives in opaque systems. So we have to build accountable systems. With that, I want to welcome my chair, Charles. Charles, karibu sana.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. And thank you to our host. I think that has been a very insightful presentation. For me, I'll first start by thanking our host and, of course, our moderator for a job very well done. This was our inaugural session as Kenya Christian Professionals Forum of what you are calling the Professionals Roundtable. This is something we want to do monthly through a webinar format, and we'll be engaging professionals on topics of professional development and improvement. So we encourage you to share widely the notices that you're going to be spreading. We also encourage feedback and comments on how we can improve the professional roundtable. You can put them in the chat here, or you can share them with us through WhatsApp or any other means. We are focused as KCPF on trying to grow our membership base and also strengthening the professional dimension of our organization, Kenya Christian Professionals Forum. So we really are delighted in this first activity, and it has gone very well, and so many of you have remained with us until the end. Apart from that, I think I'd also be asking you to visit the website of KCPF. We have a calendar with many activities planned for the year. I will also be having another monthly webinar now on our thematic areas, which is life, family, religion, good governance, and value-based education. So those are things that we'll be having every month, and we will be having other engagements, and you can check on our website to get more details and information. For those of you who'd like to become members, you can contact our secretariat, you can get information on the website, and there's a process by which you can become a member. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening and a nice weekend ahead.
Thanks, Chair. We started with a prayer. If we could conclude with a word of prayer. I think I saw Muriu, Pastor, on the chat, and we appreciate everybody. Rose Muriungi, if you could pray for us briefly as we conclude. Rose, are you there? Rose, I can see you there. If you unmute. Okay. It looks like it is taking long. Patience, close for us with the word of prayer.
And Lord, we thank you for the wonderful session that you've had about the public debt crisis in Kenya. As Christian professionals, we pray that you may give us wisdom to engage on this matter, and that also you may give our government the wisdom to deal with the issue as well. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Good night, people. And thank you so much for taking time. Looking forward to the next one. Dr. Rugo, you can see there are many things we'll take it up that have come up that we will need to discuss moving forward. But nice evening, and God bless you all.